Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Somali famine outpacing the delivery of humanitarian aid. Morocco's February 20th movement reiterates its rejection of cosmetic reforms. And Yemen Saleh authorizes power transfer talks. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now. The Somali capital, Mogadishu, is seeing an incessant arrival of refugees escaping from drought and famine-stricken regions.
Despite the humanitarian aid continuously delivered to Mogadishu, a number of refugees are complaining of a lack of aid.
Our correspondent, Ahmed Jarar, has the details.
أكثر من 400 كيلومتر قطعها علي مشيا على الأقدام قادما من مدينة جلب.
Ali walked on foot for over 400 kilometers from the southern Somali city of Jalib to the capital of Mogadishu to escape the famine and drought that killed all his cattle, his only source of livelihood. But since his arrival at the refugee camp with his family, he has not yet received the aid he has been waiting for. Therefore, his wife is forced to work for households in Mogadishu to support the family.
After we arrived at the refugee camp, we were given this hut, but we didn't find any other help. My wife washes clothes and cleans houses. In the evening, she comes back with the rest of her food to feed our children.
Less than 2 weeks ago, this place was empty. Now it is filled with new disaster-stricken arrivals with similar complaints to Ali's. It seems as though the size of refugee camps to contain displaced Somalis escaping from the worst famine in 5 decades is growing faster than the delivery of humanitarian aid.
No bathrooms, no food, no medicine. There's nothing, not even a shelter for us. Why?
Here is another kind of tragedy. These Somalis are suffering from hunger, in addition to disabilities caused by long years of civil war in Somalia. They are gathering here to receive food supplies provided by charity organizations.
ولعل ما قد يخفف عن هؤلاء كلهم استمرار وصول شحنات المساعدات الغذائية والطبية فباخرة.
Perhaps, as shipments of aid, including food and medicine, continue to arrive, these people's suffering will ease. This shipment of aid has to wait offshore because the Mogadishu port is crowded with aid ships. All this aid is expected to help hundreds of thousands of disaster-stricken Somalis stay alive.
في كل لحظة تستقبل مثل هذه المخيمات منكوبين جدد يحملون قصصا.
Every hour, a camp like this receives new refugees whose stories are no less tragic than those who came earlier. Everyone hopes that the relief efforts will be able to keep up with the speed with which their sufferings increase. Ahmed Jara, Al Jazeera, Mogadishu.
The February 20th movement that organized marches and protests in a number of Moroccan cities renewed its rejection of what it describes as sham reforms. It considered the upcoming elections as unable to usher in democracy in Morocco. The movement demanded real political reforms that move Morocco from a controlled political process to a representative one capable of producing the change demanded by the masses. In addition, the movement renewed its demand for prosecuting corruption and the corrupt.
It seems the February 20th movement was not convinced by all the efforts exerted by the Moroccan authorities in preparation for elections. During the marches and protest action organized in a number of cities, the movement confirmed that upcoming elections will not differ from preceding elections and do not constitute the reform for which masses took to the street. The movement demanded genuine political reforms that transition Morocco from a controlled political process to a real political process. Activists say it should start by removing the corrupt elite from the political arena and lifting the state's tutelage of political parties. They added that the process should conclude by holding fair elections.
These elections will not be better than the preceding ones because the governing elite in this country does not want, nor does it have a real will to change.
The movement said the slogans raised by the state are not being implemented on the ground, since neither justice was realized nor corruption dealt with. This led the movement to confirm that it will continue its protests until the downfall of corruption and the corrupt.
The officials responsible for torture and stealing the public's money are still in their posts, and for this reason we say that the state is not intent on ending the series of corruption and despotism. And this is why we are once again on the Moroccan streets.
The new constitution has taken into effect, but according to the movement, it does not include a separation of powers, nor does it tackle accountability. In addition, it does not change the human rights situation, nor does it alter the status of freedom of speech. The constitution is rejected by the movement, seeing that it will not usher in democracy in Morocco. As for the change demanded by the movement, activists say it requires a democratic constitution and demands political will.
We need a parliamentary regime with the king reigning, but not ruling, with executive power derived from popular will, with a link between responsibilities and accountability, with a separation of wealth and politics.
In addition to the political demands, the movement raised slogans demanding social justice, freedom, dignity, and an end to the high cost of living affecting basic goods.
تعبيرا عن رفضها للموقف الروسي الداعم لنظام الرئيس بشار الأسد.
To express its rejection of the Russian position in supporting the regime of President Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian opposition is rallying its supporters to participate in a day of anger against Russia on Tuesday. On social networking sites, the opposition called on its supporters to protest across Syrian cities and towns and to burn the Russian flag. On the ground, the situation remains unchanged. According to the Syrian Revolution General Commission, a number of towns in Al-Hab Plain in Hama's countryside were the target of the Syrian army's gunfire.
إطلاق نار بعدة مناطق بمدينة اللاذقية الساحلية، فيما أفيد عن تطويق رتل من الدبابات لمنطقة الرستم في حمص.
Gunfire was also heard in many towns in the coastal city of Latakia as a convoy of tanks reportedly surrounded Homs al-Rastan area amid heavy gunfire. One demonstrator died from his injuries in the city of Homs in the centre of the country. In addition, all communication was cut off from the countryside of Marat al-Naman and Jabal al-Zawiya in the province of Idlib. In line with the crackdown on protests, activists said Syrian security forces launched a house-to-house raid campaign in the eastern province of Deir ez-Zor, Daraz Hauran Plains in the south, and villages surrounding the city of Hama in search of activists demanding democracy and arrested dozens. Massive night demonstrations continued across Syrian cities and towns with the participation of thousands of people. Protesters celebrated Bashar al-Assad's birthday in their own way, setting up replicas of the president, holding his photo and chanting for his downfall and execution. They also demanded international protection for civilians.
This comes as Arab and international reactions continue to be generated on the events in Syria. Most notable was that of the Gulf Cooperation Council's foreign ministers, who called for an immediate end to the killing machine in Syria. Meanwhile, Russia maintains its support of President Bashar al-Assad.
من تخطي عدد ضحايا الاحتجاجات في سوريا عتبة 2600 قتيل.
Despite the fact that over 2,600 people have died in the protests in Syria, according to the UN Office for Human Rights, the stubborn Russian stance in support of the Assad regime remains unchanged. Following Russian President Dmitry Medvedev's meeting with British Prime Minister David Cameron, he stated that it is wrong to place additional pressure on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to force him to stop the security operations.
اعترف كاميرون أنه لم يكن ممكنا رأب الصدع القائم بين موقف روسيا
As for Cameron, he admitted it is not possible to bridge the gap in Russia and London's positions on the Syrian crisis. He added that he does not see a future with Assad. In Moscow, Syrian presidential advisor Buthaina Shaban met Russian officials and praised the Russian leadership's dealing with the events witnessed in Syria for the last 6 months. She confirmed that the Libyan scenario will not be repeated in Syria.
We agreed that political reforms must be carried out in a stable and safe atmosphere, removed from bloodshed. We hope the West adopts a stance that encourages peaceful change instead of encouraging carrying weapons and killings.
Shabin, who denied the opposition's reports on the killings of thousands of people during the Syrian revolution, admitted 1,400 people died. She said half of those killed are from security, police, and army institutions, while the other half consists of civilians. On the Arab front, the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council sent a stern message to the Syrian regime, demanding it immediately stop the killing machine, remove armed forces, and put an end to the bloodshed.
Syria has offered to cooperate with a UN nuclear agency probe into a suspected reactor site, and a meeting may take place in October. Addressing the board today, the UN International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Director General Yukiya Amano said Syria, in a letter last month, had stated its readiness to have a meeting with agency safeguard staff in Damascus in October. He said the IAEA had proposed that the meeting take place on October 10th and 11th, with the aim of advancing the agency's verification mission in Syria. In June, the UN International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors voted to report Syria to the Security Council for failing to cooperate with the agency probe. Yemeni ruling party officials said President Ali Abdullah Saleh was expected to empower his deputy to negotiate over a Gulf-sponsored plan for the transfer of power, but that he would not give up his state powers immediately. Separately, a military spokesman said troops killed 4 militants yesterday as the army consolidated its grip on Zanzibar, a day after recapturing the southern city from a group calling itself Ansar al-Sharia. Residents said a Yemeni airstrike killed at least 3 fighters near the militant-held town of Jar, apparently as they were fleeing towards it from Zanzibar. In the capital Sana'a, a security official said a brigadier general was assassinated, state media reported, while in the main southern city of Aden, an army colonel commanding an armoured brigade fighting militants in Abyan survived an assassination attempt.
Iran has officially inaugurated its first nuclear power plant in the south of the country. More now in this report.
Finally up and running, Iran's first nuclear power plant has been officially launched. The inauguration ceremony of Bushehr nuclear power plant was attended by officials from Iran and Russia, the other partner in the project. Russia's energy minister Sergei Shimatko told reporters after the inauguration ceremony that Moscow is ready to cooperate with Tehran in building more nuclear power stations.
I just want to say one more time that taking into account the trust that has been built by working with our Iranian partners, Russia will be fully willing to cooperate with the country in building, considering the capacities present in Iran. And we will support such programs in any way we can.
Shimatko, along with the head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, reassured the international community and regional nations about the safety of the plant. German companies signed a contract with Iran to build Bushehr power plant in 1975, but they cancelled the deal and stopped working following the victory of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. In 1995, Iran and Russia reached agreement to complete the project, but the plant was connected to the national power grid earlier this month after several years of delay.
Iran has managed to get Bushehr power plant online despite facing 4 rounds of UN sanctions drafted by the US and its Western allies, as well as many other punitive measures unilaterally imposed by the West with the aim of impeding Tehran's nuclear energy program.
Despite the fact that Western countries have been trying to prevent Iran from developing and becoming an advanced country, despite the sanctions and the pressure, Iran has achieved a great deal of progress in the nuclear program, both in producing electricity as well as producing its own fuel.
The 10th anniversary of 9/11 has coincided with yet another US drone strike in Pakistan's tribal areas. People in Pakistan strongly feel that virtually every day is their 9/11. Press TV's Javed Rana reports now from Islamabad.
Until mid-2001, Pakistan's tribal region was considered to be the most peaceful in the entire country with the lowest crime rate. The shock waves of 9/11 and the subsequent US invasion of Afghanistan, however, changed the entire cultural, political and administrative landscape of the tribal region. Now the region has turned into the most violent area in the world, with militants controlling parts of the tribal areas.
The security situation in Pakistan has deteriorated considerably as a consequence of 9/11 because the invasion of Afghanistan had a huge spillover effect in the tribal belt. Many people in Afghanistan have turned towards the Taliban and towards militancy, and also in Pakistan.
The US drone strikes, the Taliban bombing and counter-terrorism activities like military operations against pro-Taliban militants and the destruction of the houses is an unfortunate routine part of public life in the tribal areas. The US drone attacks and military operations against the Taliban have only generated a vicious cycle of revenge attacks against Pakistan and the NATO forces across the region. For Americans, 9/11 happened only once, but for Pakistanis, virtually every day is their 9/11. The 10 years cost of so-called war on terror for Pakistan is over 10,000 incidents of terrorism, more than 30,000 casualties, and more than 3.5 million people's dislocation from tribal areas to elsewhere in Pakistan. Nonetheless, people have demonstrated an unprecedented resilience.
Our people, they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is one blast, 100 people are killed. But next day at the same place, more than 50, 60 people are sitting, taking tea or food. So they believe in the destiny, they believe in faith. But these people now, they hate them from their core of heart. 9/11 has given only hate. 9/11 has given a disrespect for the West.
The 9/11 has shattered Pakistan's economy with $68 billion economic losses, something that has led to public protests against the government over failing to meet all the fundamental needs of life. Javed Rana, Press TV, Islamabad.
Reuters reported that 15 people were killed in an attack by Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi's battalions on an oil facility near Ras Lanouf. The Libyan National Transitional Council announced that its fighters fended off the battalion's attack on Bani Walid, one of the final strongholds of Colonel Gaddafi's loyalists. The NTC forces began reinforcing their siege on the city of Sirte, still under Gaddafi's control.
The Libyan National Transitional Council's forces are massing at the entrances of Sirte in order to resolve the situation once and for all against Muammar al-Gaddafi's remaining strongholds. The most important of these strongholds is Sirte, according to a field commander.
The distance from here to the Harawa region is 17 kilometers, and the distance from Harawa to Sirte is 65 or 70 kilometers. This will be the center of clashes, God willing.
This comes as sporadic battles between the two sides have killed more than 10 people southwest of Tripoli. For their part, the NTC fighters confirmed they are carrying out a number of recon missions, even in central Bani Walid, without encountering any resistance from Gaddafi's fighters, except for some snipers stationed on the rooftops of tall buildings. In this context, the NTC announced the arrest of Abu Zaid Dorda, the chief of Muammar al-Gaddafi's foreign intelligence. Dorda appeared in video clips defending his position in a conversation with several fighters.
Mahmoud, people are dying on both sides, and this regime is intact. People are fighting on both sides. Is that correct or not?
Dorda was captured by a group of fighters who call themselves the battalions of Martyr Abdel Ati Gadur in Zanata neighborhood of the capital, Tripoli, while more than 20 fighters with automatic weapons guarded him.
In our top story, the race for the Labour Party leadership. Will there be a chairman or perhaps a chairwoman? 4 candidates faced off in primary elections today. Standing by in our Tel Aviv studio with the details is IBA's Efrat Batat. Good evening, Efrat.
Good evening, Yochanan. Some 66,000 Labour Party members are eligible to cast their ballots in today's primaries for one of the 4 contenders. That's Sheli Yachimovich, Amir Peretz, Amram Mitzna, or Yitzhak Herzog. At 10 a.m. this morning, 171 polling stations opened across the country, and they're expected to close at 10 p.m. tonight. Final results are expected to be announced after midnight at the party's headquarters in Beit Berel. If no candidate succeeds in garnering at least 40% of the vote, then the top 2 vote-getters will face off against each other at a second round of voting next Wednesday on the 21st of September. Speaking at a voting station in his hometown of Sderot, former party leader Amir Peretz vowed that if he's selected, he will bring the party 19 mandates in the next general elections. MK Sheli Yachimovich, who has till now been leading the polls, came to cast her vote in Tel Aviv, where she stood in line waiting with fellow voters for nearly 20 minutes. Yachimovich expressed confidence in her impending victory, promising to bring about true social change and what she called an end to the capitalist regime of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Voting in Haifa, where he was once mayor for 10 years, former Labour chairman Amram Mitzna said he was confident that neither one of the candidates would get enough votes to avoid a runoff race, and that there will most certainly be a second round, one which he will definitely be part of. Last to vote was former welfare minister Isaac Herzog, who came to cast his ballot in Tel Aviv's Ramat Aviv neighborhood. Herzog estimated that today's race will be close, but expressed optimism that he will emerge as its biggest surprise. Much of today's overall results, depends on the overall voter turnout. And according to polls released just at 2 p.m. this afternoon, there was about 50% turnout. And there's still 5 hours to go, so it's still really not clear which direction this is exactly moving. Back to you, Yochanan.
All right, Efrat Batat reporting from our Tel Aviv studio. The police will allow lawful demonstrations in Israel and the Palestinian Authority ahead of a UN vote on Palestinian statehood. That word from Police Commissioner Yochanan Danino, who proclaimed that his forces will ensure the well-being of the protesters. Speaking at the IDC in Herzliya, Danino announced that as long as the law is upheld, the police will conduct themselves in the same restrained manner as they did in recent social protests. On the other hand, Israel's top cop warned that if the law is broken, officers will use firm measures to prevent other citizens' rights from being trampled upon. Danino told the gathering that if a Palestinian state is declared, it will result in demonstrations in Israel and the territories. The commissioner said that he instructed his subordinates to be tolerant and show sensitivity and restraint in order to avoid an escalation of tension. He warned that police officers who do not follow his orders will be dealt with without compromise. The majority of Europeans in the UK, France, and Germany believe that their governments should vote in favor of recognizing a Palestinian state at the UN. This according to an opinion poll appearing in today's Guardian newspaper. The poll's findings showed that the support for Palestinian statehood was 59% in the UK, 69% in France, 71% in Germany. Meanwhile, a Palestinian delegation arrived at the European Council building in Brussels as part of a global campaign for recognition of a Palestinian state. They presented a petition which they said was signed by more than 900,000 Europeans, demanding that the EU recognize Palestine. They also unfurled a giant flag proclaiming their message.
This is a very important moment in our history, where we are seeking international recognition for our state that we've been building for 2 decades now. And this means that the EU should stand on the right side of history. To support this recognition, they have helped us politically and financially to build the state. They've acknowledged our right to self-determination 3 decades ago. It's time for us to be able to implement this right and to fulfill it, and this will happen in the UN. We all have a meeting with history. There will be pressure, and there's an American position we need to deal with, and we're talking to the Americans. This serves the purpose of peace. This is in line with international law. We're speaking about 1967 borders, which are recognized internationally. This is a matter of international consensus that the Palestinians have a right to statehood. These shouldn't be empty words, and the Israelis have to understand that the international community needs to step in, and we need them to step in, not only for the Palestinian people, but for all the peoples of the region, including the Israeli people.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.